Okay, so what are we actually doing? Well, we're going to take the engine and gearbox out of this BMW and put it into this 1969 Lincoln Continental. So we'll end up with a straight 6 3-litre BMW diesel with 6 speeds. We're going to add paddle shifters and a column shifter as well for good measure. So we're going to pull the engine from the BMW, take it along with the transmission, the 6-speed automatic gearbox. I'm going to tear it down to a core engine. I'm going to recondition the injectors, the injection pump. It's going to have all new ancillaries. Turbos are going to get reconditioned. I'm going to put it all back together on the floor, get it running before it goes anywhere near the Lincoln. Then we're going to do a similar sort of thing with the transmission. So we're going to open her up, go through it, make sure it's well serviced. We're not looking to rebuild them because we know they come from a good donor. So we're just going to service them, give them the head start that they need. We'll give the engine a little tweak, a map. The Lincoln itself's in fantastic condition, it really is. But bringing it to the UK, it's been here a few weeks and it's already seen a ton of rain and snow. And this morning it was frosted over. So we're going to go through it. All the sheet metal's fine, but we're going to rust proof everything. So there'll be a ton of buzzwell going on everywhere. The bodywork's okay, but it's not amazing. So we're going to go through it, get a bit of paint on the exterior as well and just bring it back up to top spec. Wheels and tyres are going to stay the same, but we've got a little tweak on those that I want to do. Interior needs a bit of love, so it might need a retrim. Some of the insides ripped and torn and not in the best condition that it could be, so we might look at getting those retrimmed. And at the end of the day, we'll have a really, really unique, cool sleeper that will fit in over here but stand out at the same time. All right, so big day today. We've got the Lincoln in the workshop, as you can see. And you can cut to that clip here. It wasn't quite as bad as I thought it was going to be, obviously with the snow, rear wheel drive. We've got that steep ramp up into the workshop. But it wasn't too bad, so we've got it in. Today's a big day. We're going to get the engine out, pull the engine, pull the gearbox, and start making some headway. All right, so fitting this BMW engine into this engine bay might look quite simple and easy because it's a huge car and you assume that it might be a really easy job. And it probably isn't going to be terrible. So getting the engine out is going to be a bit tricky. We've got the ramp, but this thing's huge and it's only a 2-poster ramp. We've never had anything quite as big as this on the ramp. So a little bit nervous about getting it on there. It's a heavy car. It's very long, which is a lot of leverage on the ramps. So I'm not overly sure about working underneath it on these ramps. So what we're going to do is we'll get it up to like half height, stick some axle stands under it, do what we need to, which is minimal, unbolting the transmission mounts and stuff like that, I think. But largely try and work from above until we've got the engine and box out, and then it'll be a bit lighter, a bit more secure on the ramps, and then we can start working underneath properly. Alright, so on now with getting the ancillaries and bits and bobs out the way so that we can start pulling this engine. So we're starting here with the rad, and all just the general pipe work and all the cables and whatnot. So once we've got a bit of space, we can get around it. We're going to take the engine out separately to the gearbox rather than trying to take it out all in one go. So we can get to the bellows and bolts and everything now once we've got it up in the air. Just going to drop these axle stands in just for a bit of security while we're underneath it. Alright, so she's loose. We've got the fork truck on it now. We're going to try and get it out nice and carefully without damaging anything. It's a really big engine and the engine bay itself was quite snug, so just want to do it dead steady and take it carefully. Alright, she's out, clear. We'll just drop it on a pallet, stick it in the back, and then I'm not sure what we're going to do with it. The engine itself was perfectly fine, so it might be that we just get it sold and out of the way. So check out these are the original engine mounts. So that's one half, chassis half, and yeah, wasn't really attached to anything. Taking the Lincoln gearbox out. So we're just getting the gearbox out now. Pretty straightforward on this, it's just got a cross member and then the prop shaft really. And these are These are the mounts on the gearbox, so this is the gearbox mount both sides, and yeah, that wasn't attached brilliantly either. So pretty much all that was holding the engine and gearbox in were ancillaries, pipes and the prop shaft. Cool, box is out. We'll stick this on the pallet as well. Last bit is getting this prop shaft out of the way, which you can see is huge. The car's like 3 miles long, so it's not a little thing. Just checking out the underside of the car. Just like that, engine and gearbox is out. And today we're going to start making a bit of progress on getting the engine bay cleaned out and then go from there. Alright, so we're just stripping down any odd bits that are still in the engine bay and then just moving the cables and wires and stuff off the engine bay side so that we can clean them down. Ethan's in there just giving it a wire brush and then vacuuming out any crud and muck. So the engine bay is in part cleaned, as you can see. There's still quite a bit more to do. Ethan's been working on that, and eventually we'll get it immaculate so that it's at the point where we can get some buzz weld on it and get it protected. But it's in amazingly good condition. Well, the whole car is, to be honest with you. Underneath is in really, really good condition. It's a Texas car, so it's obviously been in good weather, which is great. But yeah, it's in really, really good condition. Like if you look around all the detail parts in the corners, the places that normally would rust, definitely normal for UK cars to rust. It's really, really in solid condition, so I'm impressed. And so while that's happening, I was just taking a look at doing a little bit of body work here under the rear windscreen. There was a little bit of rust, so we just cut it out and put some fresh plates in. The Lincoln. Alright, so now we're on with cleaning the underside of the car. It is, as I've said, in great condition, but there's a load of muck and crud and stuff underneath here, so we're just scraping everything off. Then we're going to wire brush it and get it back to this sort of red primer colour that it's got, so that we can get some buzz weld on it. So I just got the Lincoln all cleaned up. Ethan's been under here wire brushing everything. So I just wanted to show you just like how good condition it is. It's crazy what it looks like underneath. It's, for the age of the car, it's so good. So check this out. So starting at the back here. This is like the rear quarter. It's like new. Really interesting fact that I didn't realise. So this is a unibody structure. There's no actual chassis per se, but it does kind of have this chassis structure of a sense. But if you look sort of just by the shock there, you can see it's silver, and it's because part of the unibody structure that you can see there is galvanised, which is not something I've seen before. I've never seen a manufacturer of classic vehicles. You know, bearing in mind this is a 1969 car, so all the silver that you can see is galvanised steel. Which must be done from factory, which I think is crazy, really. I think that's really interesting, but you can see the general condition of it. All wire brushed up now, got off years and years of crud and really bad sort of factory underseal type stuff. But it's in remarkably good condition. I would say 99% of the steel is in like really fabulous condition. So we're just gonna panel wipe all this bit of thinners, and then get to buzz welding it, so it'll get a bunch of coats of buzz weld, including the axles and stuff as well. The only bits that we've got to address are the floor wells. So this is driver's side floor well, and you can see there's a bit of rust where it's just come through. Not a crazy amount if you look. It's mostly just pinholes, or large pinholes, where it started to come through, and we've been poking at it and wire brushing it from both sides. This side's a bit worse, but not terrible really, so it's not rotted out. There's a good hole there where I've pushed it through, but it's not terrible. It's easily fixed. We're just going to cut that out, weld in some fresh steel, and we're good to go again. But it's in a nice area, you know, it's flat steel, so we're not going to make any special shapes. We're not trying to go around the transmission tunnel or any intricate shapes and stuff, so that'll be a really easy fix. All in the engine bay from the underside. This will all get painted. Axles will get painted, suspension at the front will get painted, fuel tank here will get painted. It's just in insanely good condition. I honestly don't know how well. I do know it's been in a dry state all its life, but yeah, so there she is. So we did have footage of us pulling the engine out of the car in the yard, and then also stripping off most of the ancillaries, but unfortunately that footage got corrupted and didn't record properly, so we're going to start here from what we've got. Okay, so now we're on to just cleaning down the engine block. You can see most of the ancillaries are off already. Got the turbo unit and everything off, the manifold and all that stuff. We're just cleaning it down now. Ethan's on the wire brush, getting it all cleaned down so we can just, you know, get a lick of paint on it and make it look nice. It doesn't need to be perfect for what it is. It's not some show car, but we want to make it look a little bit newer than it is. So that's this side cleaned down. All the manifold gasket face is clean as well, so we know we'll get a good seal. And the aluminium corrodes, you know, over the years. It's an old engine now. It's got a lot of just general grub on it, so we've cleaned it all down. Just degreasing the top there, and I'm going to pull the injectors out now. I left them in for the cleaning process so that nothing got in the bores, you know, so nothing got inside and or damaged the injector seal face. Pulling these out now really carefully, and yeah, just make sure nothing goes in the bores as well, which is why I'm using the airline and stuff and just trying to be really careful about it. Got lucky, so pulling the injectors, you can get a special tool for pulling them with the BMW engine, and I've pulled a lot of injectors out of a lot of BMW engines, and I've never needed a puller. Got quite lucky. I bought one years ago on the off chance I needed it, and it's still brand new. I've never used it. Just getting a can of RE, Buzzweld RE, rust encapsulator, and giving it a coat, and then that's followed by a coat of black, which is chassis in one. Both have got rust prevention properties in there. Not that it really matters on an engine, but it leaves a really good finish as well, like a satin black, so happy with that. Next onto the turbo, and so this is the turbo back from being rebuilt, and I sent the whole thing as one assembly to the turbo place, and they've sent it back in pieces, the two separate turbos and then all the manifold stuff. So at this point it was a case of figuring out how this jigsaw went back together again with all these pieces. So it took a bit of figuring out and a lot of looking on YouTube for pictures and stuff, but we got it figured out and got it back together, and it looks great. So then here's a bunch of other ancillary parts that we've got to bolt on, all new bits, new alternator there, and a host of other stuff that's going to go back together again. So now we're going to jump on with putting some bits back on the block. I'm going to start with the turbo and the manifold and everything. This whole assembly is quite big, so we're going to get that on. Cleaning up the gasket face, make sure we get a good seal, brand new manifold gaskets going on. with the whole assembly. It's a fair size thing, twin turbo assembly, and it's super tightly packaged, so trying to get to all the bolts, the manifold bolts, to get it back together is really interesting. Got to be creative with your extensions and stuff. Turbo pipes going on, the drain pipes, all standard stuff this is, so it's all just going back on. A brand new alternator as well, and we'll be using a bunch of other brand new stuff. Starter, motor, water pump, and all the ancillaries basically are going to be new. Essentially it's just going to be the core engine that's original, but we know that's a good one anyway. So water pump going on now. It just makes sense to do all this sort of stuff, you know, while the engine's out and you've got good access to it. And for the cost of this sort of stuff, you know, it's a few £100 here, a few £100 there, and it's just right. So we've also dropped on, after this point, a couple of billet pulleys. So they're our Syncro gearboxes, billet pulleys for the BMW M57 and other BMW engines. I'm sure they fit. So we've got them bolted on, and we also put on a billet steering pulley, which we didn't get a video of, I don't think. Next up then is the good stuff, the injection pump and the injectors, all fully reconditioned with warranty and everything. So we know they're going to be right, so it's just a case of bolting these back in. Injection pump's a doddle, it's 3 bolts and then a nut for the timing pulley thing. And then injectors is just slowly just dropping them back in, a little bit of grease, the new copper seal, and then drop them back in. It's a little bit fiddly because there's a bunch of these little nuts, the little M5 I think they were, or something like that, nuts that hold them in with a little clamp, so it's a bit fiddly. Just got to be careful you don't drop them, especially in the top of the engine. So I just got them going in, and it's starting to look nice there. Satin black everywhere, and all nice and clean, and you can see all the new stuff's going on. It just looks really good. So next up, I've got to put on the injector rail there, or the fuel rail, with the hard pipes that go to the injectors, hard fuel pipes, and then the main pipe from the injection pump to the rail. And in that rail, you've got, to the left hand side, you've got the rail sensor, and on the right hand side there you've got a control valve, and they're getting swapped out for new ones as well because they can be problematic. So new gaskets and seals in a few things. There's 3 main things really. There's the oil filter housing there, and then there's got a couple of seals. And then when the inlet manifold goes on, that's got a bunch of seals in it as well. So you've got to swap them out, but they all come in the kit as well. Okay, so big day today. Got the engine for the Lincoln on the bench, as you know, on the little test rig, and it's all hooked up now. So I'm just going to walk you through what we've hooked up. Going to get it running to make sure everything's good, make sure it works, make sure the injectors, new injectors that we put in, and the injection pump and all the other bits and bobs that we've put in there, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So let's take a look. Alright, so this is the setup. Pretty basic, as you can see. Might look a bit messy, but it is organised, so I'm just going to take you through it. Obviously, engine. So she's hooked up enough that it will run. The sensors that are required to make it run are hooked up. Obviously there's no intercooler, there's no boost pipes, so she won't be boosting, and there's no map sensor and odds and sods like that, but there is enough stuff to make it run. I've had engines, M57 engines, running in this state, so there she is. So then on the bench, actually let's put that down here. So battery down there, straightforward. Fuel pump, fuel source, so that's got the feed and return going into that can of race diesel there, and then all important ignition switch, tough pad for data, so I can see what's going on, standard BMW relays and stuff like that, relay pack there that's in the MW machines 4x4
wiring loom, which is a brilliant bit of kit, and then obviously the ECU. The wiring loom is so simple. If I take off that, I have 2 lives and 1 earth, and they go up there to the loom, and that's all that is required to make this run. So 2 lives, 1 earth, permanent, and then they're switched, and then we've got the throttle pedal on top there. And like I said, there's a bunch of stuff that's not connected. Obviously the auto gearbox isn't there, and there's a bunch of sensors and stuff that aren't connected. Obviously there's no cooling and stuff like that, but this is the most basic form that it will run. So I've pointed, and it will run very smoky, I think, because there's no boost and it won't really know what it's doing. So I've pointed the exhaust towards the door and away from me, and oh, one last thing, the most important thing, the key. Obviously she's not hooked up, so there's no switch, and because it's auto, until the gearbox is hooked up, you basically have to start it off the starter motor because of the park inhibitor, because it won't be seeing a signal from the gearbox to say it's in park, hence the key. So let's get cracking. So there we go, before the battery goes flat, one running BMW M57 engine standalone on a pallet in the workshop with very minimal wiring and sensors and stuff. So now we know it works, we can carry on building it up and get some boost. Okay, onto the gearbox now then, and we're just going to start cleaning it up and making it look right, and then also give it a little bit of a service as well. So we're not going to go too mad with this because we know that it's a good gearbox and it ran great and drove great, and it's just a case of cleaning it up with a wire brush on the exterior and just making it look nice, and then we'll give it a lick of paint as well afterwards. So I'm taking the sump off here. So this is a plastic sump on the bottom of the gearbox. It's on its side and it's held on by a bunch of Torx bolts. So we're just whipping that off, and then inside, built into this sump, is the filter. So it's a service part. You swap the whole sump during the service. There's a common issue with these gearboxes. Some of the seals on the inside of the mechatronics unit can swell, I think, with time, and they just change shape a little bit and need replacing. So it's a cheap and easy thing to do. So we're going to just jump in and do that. So this is one of the main seals, and then there's 3 or 4 tubular seals here that you can see I'm just pulling out, and they're just sort of stuffed in there really. You can see there the shape of them, they're slightly off shape. They're supposed to be just a simple tubular shape, and there are a few different length ones as well. So this is the new sump. Like I say, it's a service part, and it comes as a brand new sump with all the new bolts and stuff for you to put it back together again. And then I also got the seals as well, so the replacement seals. So they're the new seals, the tubular kind. And if you take a look here at the old one, you can sort of see this step and in the seal itself, in the rubber seal, where it's sort of misformed and changed shape over time. Whereas the new ones are obviously nice and round and perfectly shaped. So it's just a case of dropping these back in the holes and then basically tapping them all the way home. And I'm doing it here with a hide hammer just so I don't damage anything. Make sure they're all the way home like that, and then just drop this front seal in. And then I'm putting the mechatronics unit back on with what seem to be 1,000,000 bolts just to unbolt this bit, making sure I'm keeping everything clean and flat, and then just nipping up the bolts. Clean down the gasket face as well, and then it's just a case of dropping this new sump on, and it's got a proper rubber seal, so you don't need to use any sealant or anything. It just bolts straight on there. So now I'm just painting the exterior of the gearbox black. So this is the same black as we did the engine block, which is using Buswell chassis in one. It leaves like a really nice finish. It's a sort of a satin, matte satin finish. And it'll just protect the gearbox a little bit from alley corrosion, and it just makes it all look a bit nicer than sort of white, rusty aluminium. So onto the engine. So before we drop the engine in any further, I thought it would be a good idea to bolt these plates onto the side of the block just to make life easy. So we laser cut these up and they match the bolt holes on the block on either side. So this is on the right hand side, just underneath the turbo, and that's going to give me something good to mount the engine to. So carry on now, dropping the engine into the hole, and then we can sort of figure out a good position for her and look at getting it bolted in. So it was a bit awkward doing this on my own. I just wanted to be really careful with it. I wanted to make sure I wasn't damaging anything as it was going in, or damaging the body or anything like that as I was dropping it in. So you can see here with the engine in the hole now, down as far as I can get it, or the engine and gearbox, and it's in the tunnel pretty well, as far back as it's going to go. The original transmission tunnel isn't huge, and the gearbox is, so that's about as far as it really wants to go. The main issue we've got is that the sump is hitting the cross member. We're going to pull the engine out, whip the sump off, and that means that we can carry on getting it into position, get the engine into position, and then it will just be a case of sorting out the sump once we know exactly where the engine's going to live. So just taking off the sump, and then here you've got the oil pickup pipe as well, which is like a plastic pipe that drops into the bowl of the sump that picks up the oil. So I'm just taking that off as well, just so it doesn't get damaged whilst we do this. And then it was just, we wrapped up the bottom of the engine so it didn't get any muck or anything in there while we worked on it. So there we go, it's going in, just dropping it down, being really careful doing it on my own. Like I said, I didn't want to damage anything and I didn't want to have any disasters as it went down.
Okay, so got the engine in the hole, as you can see. She's just chopped up at the minute on wooden blocks and the jack on the rear, on the gearbox itself. So position-wise, I'm really pleased with it. It's in a good spot. As you can see, let's take a look around here. So it's sat nice and centrally in the engine bay. Got good space either side. The engine sat a bit further forward than I would probably like. It would be nice to get it back another 3 or 4 inches, which would just give us extra room up here in the front where the Rad Pack and everything's going to be. And you don't really need this much space at the back, but it is a big bay. So looking in the tunnel, you can see down there, it's in as far as it's going to go. I can't lift it up anymore, otherwise we'll be hitting the transmission tunnel of the car. So we want to avoid that. There's lots of space around the back here. Changing the starter motor in the future will be a doddle. As I say, it would have been nice to have a bit more space up front here, because originally I was thinking to keep the original Lincoln Rad and then just put in a custom intercooler. But what I'm thinking now is this isn't the Rad, this is the aircon Rad. So, and it's massive and it's unnecessarily big, to be quite honest. So I might end up taking that out, freeing up a ton of space, and then putting in the complete Rad Pack from the BMW, which comes with all the intercooler, all the aircon stuff, oil coolers for the transmission and stuff like that. So that'll probably be a good idea. Again, tons of space here, so that's good from up above. From below, so from below you can see now we've got loads of room around the sump. Obviously there is no sump fitted at the minute, but we've got plenty of space to stick one. It'd kind of be a mix of
a front sump and a rear sump, so it's going to be like a mid sump, because if it was a rear sump, you're going to foul on that cross member, and if it's a front sump, which would have been nice, but if it's a front sump, it's going to foul there on the anti-roll bar, which is this here. So we kind of want something that's going to go in the middle there, that's a mid sump, but you can see there's tons of space there, so putting something in is not going to be a big deal really. It's just going to be a case of fouling something up, and that way we're not interfering with any of the original Lincoln chassis. So the other consideration then is this steering rod here, arcade steering design, which annoyingly goes at the rear and not the front, and passes under the gearbox. Let's just show you. So that was one big clearance issue we've got there, is to make sure that we've got space there, but that's worked out really well, and as this moves we maintain that distance there. It might even clearance some of the ribs on the gearbox, but you can see we've got good space there, so that's landed really well. So I'm quite pleased with that. The sump of the gearbox, as you can see, is pretty level, so she's in a good place, and at the minute we just propped up on the jack. So position wise, it's looking really good at this point. So next job now is to basically start mounting it. Obviously we put those steel plates on the engine block, and it means now we've got something to weld to. The original gearbox mount holes probably won't work, but I'll try and tie into them and then just basically join up where the block is to the chassis. But that's the next job. So there's the original bolt hole for the engine mount on this side, and then there is our plate on this side, so we can pick up off of that pretty easily actually. It's not too bad, better than I thought. On the passenger side, the mount's going to be a bit more work. We've got the exhaust to come out here, and then we've got this oil feed pipe here as well, oil drain pipe, sorry, from the turbo. The original mount hole there on the chassis, and our plate is way down here, more towards the front. So there are bolt holes at the rear of the block here, so it might mean that we pick up a bit more here, or try and come this way under the turbo to mount, which is probably the better way, under here, because obviously the exhaust is going to come over the top and take up a lot of room there.
Next job then is engine mounts, and here you can see the plates that we bolted on a minute ago, and where they land in relation to the original mounts, which are up here on the cross member. I've got these laser cut plates here, which on this side I'm going to bolt up to the chassis off of the original hole there, like that, and then that's just going to stick out enough for me to be able to put on a rubber engine mount donut and then get it to mount up to the plate on the engine itself. So as you can see, I've done that, and then I'm using the wooden block to mimic the rubber engine mount, so it's the same height as the engine mount that we're using. I just didn't want to use the engine mount that's made of rubber whilst I'm cutting and grinding and welding and stuff around it. So now I just want to change the mount here just slightly and add in an extra bolt hole. So I'm going to put this plate on and drill a hole through the cross member, so that I've got this little bit of support here, and then you can see there that the engine mount has got the bolt through it. Onto the other side, I've done a similar sort of thing. As you know, we've got the plate already on the engine side, but this one lands in a really good place. So here's the hole, and I'm just going to drop one of the rubber mounts into that hole, and then use this plate to go from the engine and get that to line up with the rubber mount like that. So again, using a wooden block as a dummy engine mount, and you can see there it's a really simple way of getting the engine mounted. So we can just weld that up, add in some gussets here across to the main plate, and then that'll be good and strong.
Onto the gearbox mount now, and this is a pretty simple one actually. It landed in a really good place where there was an existing cross member. So this is the original gearbox mount that bolts to the gearbox. It's got this odd shape rubber mounting in the BMW, which we're going to replace for just a normal round rubber donut type, just to keep things simple. So I was just cutting down the mount itself and the excess aluminium that's on it so that we can bolt in this rubber mount, which then will land on the cross member on the Lincoln. Here on the Lincoln, I'm just drilling out a fixing point, and what I'm doing is actually I'm drilling 2 holes and then I'm going to cut across and create a slot. That means that when I bolt up the engine mount, I've got a little bit of room to work with. I've got a bit of play and I can position the gearbox exactly where I want it. I've got a bit of room to work with rather than just trying to line up one bolt hole. I can move the engine or the gearbox ever so slightly to where I want it. And you can see there now mounted in the tunnel with a mock wooden rubber donut that the gearbox is in a good position and it's mounted nice and strong and there's loads of room around it. Onto the sump now, and that's the last bit of sort of mounting related stuff. Obviously we had to take the sump off to get the engine in, so now we're going to look at modifying it so we can put that back on and the engine's safe again. So the rear mounted sump, or the rear bowl sump, didn't work at all and we couldn't really do anything with that, so we sourced this front bowl sump, which is off a specific E38, I think, BMW, that's slightly different. It has the bowl of the sump right at the front, and this worked great and it was almost perfect but not quite. So you can see there we've marked out a bit with the white pen, and this bit is what fouls on the chassis in the Lincoln or other components in the Lincoln. So we're going to cut that out like so and then just box that back in so that it clears. And you can see there with the sump mocked up in place, it clears that tie rod mount on the Lincoln. So with a bit of CAD, we've knocked up some plates. They're going to fit there like that. And then it's just a case of welding them to the sump like so, as if by magic. And then we can bolt this sump back up and it'll clear everything, and happy days. So this is the underside of the car. This is the footwell on the driver's side specifically, and you can see it's not in terrible condition. Either side actually is pretty reasonable, but it's pinholed. So we're going to cut these out on both sides like so, and basically just weld in some new sheet steel. So on the passenger side here, you can see we've cut out what we need to around the existing structure, and then driver's side's marked, and Ethan's cutting them pieces out now. Basically just removing what we have to and leaving as much of the original structure in there as possible. And there you go, you can see a better shot there. You can see the channel, like a U channel, which is kind of the unibody, and we're just trying to really neatly cut that out. There's a really good shot actually, you can see. And we're just going to make up some plate work that's going to go straight in there. Kind of like that actually, a bit of cardboard template, and get a really nice fit all the way around so that we can weld that in, and get a really nice fit. There's the other side, a little bit more complex with some slightly different shapes than the driver's side, but essentially that's what it's going to look like. So that's from steel, and you can see it's got a good fit, so we'll get a really good weld all the way around, and then when it's all ground back and everything, it'll look original, it'll look right. And there we go, this one's drilled now so that we can get some plug welds or spot welds to attach to the original structure underneath that you saw a second ago. But that there is ready to go in. So then on this side you can see we started tacking it in places, making sure that everything's good and strong. And then on the passenger side we realised that this piece here just wasn't quite good enough to weld to, so we've cut that out, added in an extra section, and it means that we'll get a really nice strong footwell when it's all done. There you go, she's all tacked in and then tacked from underneath as well, so that galvanised structure, unibody structure there, is just all tied back in as well. You can see we've done a really careful job just getting it all to fit right on both sides, and that's all welded in now, all masked up now, so we can get some buzz weld
on here so that it doesn't end up going rusty again. So we've gone with Buzzweld RE, which is rust encapsulator, which is the red stuff, and there you go, firing it all in the footwell, so this will literally never rust again. It's had a few coats and that'll be good and strong for some time to come. Footwell's looking really good actually there. Next little bit of welding is a patch in one of the rear wheel wells, or rear wheel arches. Tiny little patch, nothing major, so we're just going to cut that out of some 2mm steel using the guillotine. Obviously made from a nice cardboard template, pretty straightforward shape, nice rectangle tacked in there. There's got an ever such a slight fold in it, so we welded that in, ground it back, and then painted this with some Buzzweld FX liner, which is textured, so it'll match the original textured paint that's in there when it's all dried and had a few coats. Next up now, we're in the boot, and Ethan's just cleaning it out, getting all of the loose crud and muck and old paint and just everything that's stuck in there. The boot's actually in really good condition and didn't need any work. It was just a case of clean it out, get all the junk that was in there out, and then we're going to get some paint on it so that it stays in this condition for a few more years. So jumping in, Ethan's there working with some rust encapsulator again, so that's the red stuff, straight onto the existing paint that's there, and also bare metal and stuff like that as well. It will just cover all of that and stop any corrosion, keep the moisture out and everything. So there you go, there's the first coat, and she'll get another one as well. And you can see we've covered pretty much everything that's metal. And now that that's done, we're going in using power can from Buzzwell. These power cans are awesome. They put on so much paint, it's brilliant. So when you've got a big area like this, it covers really, really well. The paint that we're using is a CIO, which is chassis in one, which is also an anti-rust paint that's good to go over the rust encapsulator. So it's double coated with rust encapsulator, and then it gets 2 coats of chassis in one as well. So we're never going to see rust again. Onto the underside now. Obviously you saw us cleaning it before in a previous video, so now it's time to get paint on it. We've done exactly the same as we did with the footwells and the boot. So it had a couple of coats of rust encapsulator, the same as the boot and the floor, but then we've gone with WAR, which is wheel arch refinement from Buzzweld again, using a power can, and it goes on really well. And you can see here we've done all of the underside of the floor, we've done the axle casings and pretty much everything on the underside. Now it will be good for many years to come, and also leaves a really, really nice finish and just makes it all look really nice. And I know that for the future this is going to be pretty solid, and if we just keep on top of it every few years, it literally will last forever. Alright, so jumping on with the exhaust then. This is the original downpipe from the BMW. It's had a DPF delete at some point, and so I just wanted this end that is the actual turbo end, and then it's got the sensors in it as well. And the rest of the downpipe won't really work with the chassis in the Lincoln or the bodywork or the tunnel in the Lincoln. So I just wanted this end, and then from here I can sort of weld what I need to get it going in the right direction. So I'm just bolting this back up now, so I've just got the sort of the flange and the sensors, and then I'm just bolting that back up to the turbo. There's a good amount of room here for me to work with, which is handy. So yeah, it just made the job a little bit easier than having the tunnel be really close, and I couldn't really get in there, so this was quite handy. So I've bolted that on there, and you can see I've got it rotating upwards because directly below it is the chassis rail. And now I'm just connecting up some pie cuts. So these are a tube that's been cut in the shape of a pie, hence the name. And I'm just tacking a couple of these together into the shape of a bend, like you can see there. So just with a simple tack, because I know that I need the exhaust to come up, and now I want to take it back down towards the floor. So I'm just tacking a few of those in so I've got a bend, and then I can take it back to the car and just sort of work with it and get it in a position where I want it. And basically it's just a process of just tacking together these pie cuts and shaping the exhaust. So there you go, you can see I've taken the bit that I cut off of the exhaust that will go down, and then the pie cut bend basically to make them join back together, those two pieces join back together but go in the direction I want. So I know I need a bit more of a bend, so I've added another pie cut. I think these are about 15-degree pie cuts. And you can see, there you go, it's working in a direction, and that's not too bad there. So I've just got to align the direction of it. I know I can tack that in there. And there you go, on the bench, tacking it together, and just that extra little bit of a bend to the exhaust there has given me a good basis to work on, and that should fit and give me a good downpipe. So just tack that in position. I'm quite happy with that, as you can see. So just tacking that on, and then we'll take a look at it and see, make sure I'm happy with it, make sure it's going, the output of it is going down to where I want it to be for the rest of the exhaust to hook up. Obviously that bit that I've welded back on has got the flexi bend in it for the exhaust. So underneath you can see I've got loads of room around it, and then sort of here it'll come, the original exhaust sits here in this gap, and I can make it marry up to that downpipe. It's clear of the steering rod, that side doesn't move, it's the other end that moves. So yeah, there's a good spot there. So I'm just going to get some extra tacks on this exhaust with it as it is. I don't want to get unbolting it and then break the tacks that I've done, because they're only very light tacks. So I'm just tacking it all together, and then we can remove it. Okay, so this is the ECU mount in there, and it was a nice spot for it. Keeps all the wiring at the back, so it's a bit safe and stuff. And we just used the MW Machines 4x4 bracket, and then just re-drilled a couple of holes in the top of it to take up on these two holes here, which are part of the bottom batch. And then all the stock BMW relays and fuses and stuff are just mounted straight onto that as well. And then there's some extra bits down here that come with the MW Machines 4x4 loom that I've added on there as well. So it's all together, it's all as neat as it can be. We'll tidy up these odd loose wires that we're not using in this application to come with the loom. And that'll be nice and simple, and everything's really easy to get to there. You know, if a fuse goes or the relay packs up or whatever, it's easy to get to. So mounting the fuel pump now, it's an inline BMW pump, and I want to mount it somewhere where it's easy to access, so we don't need to run miles and miles of wire into it, and minimise pipe work and stuff like that. So a good spot for it is here, sort of on the side of the bell housing. The injection pump is sort of the front side of the engine on this side, so we just need to make up a bracket here for these two bolt holes. So just using a bit of CAD, I have just knocked up a little plate here, and then you can see it just wants a bent there. So just going to knock this up out of a bit of thin steel and see how it goes. So there's the fuel pump mount. You can just about see the bracket, which is here, and that's just really simple. Mounted it on a universal clamp for a 55mm diameter pump, and it sits there quite easy, and it's nice and easy to get to if ever it needs changing as well. The next task that I needed to sort of figure out was the shifter for shifting the gearbox, so from park neutral, reverse and drive and all that stuff. On the BMW, obviously there's a shifter on the transmission tunnel, which is here, and it's run by a cable, super simple. On the Lincoln, it's on the column here, which you don't see on any British cars really past the 70s, I think. And it runs via a rod instead of a cable. So we need to connect this end basically to the gearbox end, which is quite a lot further forward than the transmission tunnel. I didn't want to, we could have used the BMW one and stuck it down on the transmission tunnel here, but then we'd need to make some sort of cubby box, you'd lose the middle seat, it'd just look odd and ugly and wouldn't really fit, whereas this is completely standard. When the bonnet's closed and the doors are shut and stuff, you know, you don't know that there's a BMW engine under there, and I quite like it that way, and I want to keep it that way. So we're going to connect this bit to the bit under the bonnet. So on the underside of the car, we're just taking a look at the original link rod from the Lincoln shifter setup, and this is just up here, and it's just held on by some circlips. So I'm just pulling this off, and you can see here it's just like an 8mm rod with a couple of bends in it. So we're just mimicking that with a bit of 8mm rod with a couple of bends in it that's slightly longer, that will hook into the original Lincoln setup, and then like that you can see that's the sort of length I want and the sort of place I want it to be to operate the gearbox selector. Originally I was thinking about using a separate piece of steel to act as a linkage as well. With a bit more thought I looked into it, and it was just a case of moving the selector arm on the gearbox that would allow me to put this rod in the specific position I want. So we're just changing the slot on the one end, and that means that the angle that this lever is sitting at now is slightly different. So when I put the rod up, everything will work as it should, and in the direction it should be working in. Okay, so that's the shifter hooked up inside the engine bay at this end, and it's obviously a really simple way of doing it. We've got down here the end of the column, if you like. There's a column running through the steering column that comes out here, and we've basically via this rod linked it straight up to the gearbox, and that works brilliantly now. So we've got this shifter set up. It was super simple, arguably easier than the BMW setup, and it all works. We've got the pivot points right and everything, so it works great. So with the Rad Pack, this is the stock BMW 5 Series Rad Pack with the big electric fan, intercooler there at the bottom. This is the steering cooler and obviously the main rad, and then at the front that's the steering cooler, intercooler, and then the air conditioning rad. So this is the space I've got at the front of the Lincoln, which isn't tons, but it's not a tiny gap either. So to mount this whole Rad Pack, I basically need to sit it in a cradle and then sort of support it at the top. So here you can see I've drilled out a couple of the factory brackets to get them out of the way, and I'm essentially going to make my own cradles using a bit of box section like this. So this is the standard rubber that the Rad Pack sits in on the side of the rad, and I just want to make myself a nice little cup arrangement that's going to mount that rubber kind of like this. So the rubber will just sit in there, and there you go, there's a better shot of it, so you can see the rubber's sat in there, and that's where it's going to live. So let's knock up another one of those. So this cup I've made that's going to hold the rad rubber, I basically now need to mount it to the Lincoln body, and I've got a couple of options. I've got this option on the side here that you can see the two bolts are. I could go from the cup to these to this plate where these two bolts are, or make something that's going to pick up off those two bolts. So the other option I've got is to make up a bracket that connects those two cups together and then bolts down to the chassis in the Lincoln, essentially making a frame underneath the Rad Pack. So I'm just using a bit of 3mm flat bar here, and then I've stuck two bends in it, as you can see, and we're going to just weld those two cups to it, and you can see I'm picking up on the left hand one and then across to the right hand one like that, and that gives me something to bolt down into the chassis. So that's that steel work bolted in there now permanently. Pins welded up, and those bolts drop through the factory holes. Captive on top just to make assembly a load easier, just so you've got a nut on the bottom and that's it. So now we can drop the rad in, bolt up the top. On with some pipe work now then, and this is an intercooler pipe. I'm just rolling a bead on it so that the intercooler pipe, when it boosts, doesn't pop off. Which is a really annoying thing if you've ever experienced that. So just using this bead roller, which is super handy, and it forms a nice bead like that. So this part of the pipe is the original BMW one there. You can see the logo on it. and it's got the boost sensor in it. So next up is the expansion tank, plumbing that, and then the top of the rad, plumbing the top of the rad as well, and figuring out where all that's going to go. So you can see here, we've got the expansion tank. If we stick it on the side of the wing, inner wing, we've got the main top hose of the rad. Then we've got the sort of the lower outlet from the expansion tank that's got to go down here into the main BMW system on the engine. So you can see I've just knocked that lower one up, and that goes really neatly around that boost pipe. Top hose goes up and over to the back of the engine, and then the little bleed off just runs round the rad and the top hose and into the bowl. So the next thing is the cooler for the Autobox. On the BMW one you saw earlier, they have a really basic, small sort of cooler thing that isn't brilliant. So I wanted to add in this nice cooler. Nice and easy, I've mounted it right in front of the rad. There's acres of space in the front part of this car with it being so big, and then it was just a case of running the lines back to the cooler itself. I used one of the Syncro gearboxes, 6 HP takeoffs on the gearbox, which comes with AN10 fittings. So it's literally a couple of AN10 fittings on the gearbox, and then a couple on the cooler, and then just run the lines where you need them.
So this is the 6 HP cooler takeoff kit then from Syncro. So it's just 2 custom AN10 fittings, a fork, a couple of seals, and this spacer with a bolt. And it basically just bolts on from in the same position as the factory solid steel pipes, and then it gives you this nice AN10 fitting, and you can just run your own pipe work.
Okay, so the rad's now dropped in, and then you can see I've added this viscous fan. And it's nice and snug to the rad, but it's not on top of it sort of thing that's going to cause an issue. But it will cool really well, and it does. So for the top mounts, I've just made up some tiny little brackets that go from the rad back to the bodywork here, and that's worked out really, really well because they're nice and close, and it's not anything overbearing or bulky or unnecessary. It just bolts to the chassis and then to the rad itself. So moving on to pipe work. For the most part, it's pretty simple, really. We've got the original BMW top hose, which is over here by me, and that goes straight to the rad. The bottom hose is more or less standard as well. And then there's just a few bits like the top intercooler pipe here, where I've shortened this sort of EGR delete piece, and that's given us a bit more clearance here. We've used the standard BMW fitting, which is this one, and then run some black silicone hoses all the way down to the intercooler basically, so it just drops down there with some Jubilee clips. Heater pipes are really, really simple as well. They're just standard heater pipes that go to the heater fittings here on the matrix, and then down to the standard BMW fittings on this side. So steering pipes were really simple as well. We've basically used one half of the Lincoln and then one half of the BMW and joined them. So I've literally cut the pipes, got the lengths I want, and then taken them to a pipe place, and they've basically just swaged these joints on here like that, and then it's allowed me to just bolt the two halves of pipe together, which is really handy. It means that it's not a custom pipe, it's using what was already there, and it all fits. On with the prop shaft then, and you can see here this is the BMW, back of the BMW gearbox, and what I've decided to do is use the existing, or as much of the existing BMW prop shaft as we can. So here at the back of the gearbox you can see there's this triangular flange, and then that houses a rubber donut, and then there's a second triangular flange on the prop shaft that bolts to the donut. So you've got like a cushion effect, and it just takes up any transmission slack and stuff like that, and just makes the drivability nicer in the car. So we're going to retain that, use this section of the BMW prop shaft at the front, and the BMW prop shaft's also quite long, but it has a centre bearing midway down. The reason it has this is because it's a long prop shaft, and rather than having one huge long prop shaft, you can have a two-piece one that gives you better angles and everything. Actually lands in a really good place on the chassis. There's some mounting points that aren't being used for anything. It means that we can make up some sort of bracket or plate work to go there and carry the bearing. And then at the other end, you can see the BMW has this sort of CV joint on the diff end, whereas the Lincoln has a conventional yoke joint. So there you go, you can see we've made up a carrier for the bearing to mount that on, and all we did was put some riv nuts in, some heavy duty riv nuts into the chassis, and then made up this plate work from 6mm plate, shaped it around the exhaust so that it didn't interfere there, and then also kept everything clear of those park brake cables which run to the rear axle. So the second half of the prop shaft, like I say, it's got this CV joint, and we need to get it to the diff end, which has a yoke joint. There's about 14 to 18 inches, something like that, between the two. So we've got to figure out something to go between the two. So back to this prop shaft, Lincoln prop shaft on the top, and then this is the BMW prop shaft with this CV. So I'm thinking we'll cut it off there, and then use this end, the yoke end of the Lincoln prop shaft, and basically join the two together. So we'll probably cut it there, bolt that end up where it lives, the other side of the bearing, and then we just need to marry those two together to get that prop shaft in. Missing the donut just there, but with the bearing and everything, it's nice and straight, and we've got some good angles. I've cut both sections to roughly where I think they need to be, and bolted them back up. Measured the ODs, and then I've had this piece made, which came from a company I think that does exhausts. So they've made one side that goes on the Lincoln side and one side that goes on the BMW side. So at the minute I just want to mock this up, and then we're going to send this section of the prop shaft to Gwyn Lewis, who can make it properly, but it'll give us the opportunity to mock it up, make sure that everything clears and that we've got the correct length, and we can literally take that, then give that to Gwyn Lewis, say make us one of those, and he'll come back with an awesome prop. So in a flash, that's pretty much what happened, and now we have this awesome prop shaft which bolts to the Lincoln end perfectly. It's thick wall, heavy duty, so it'll take all the power and the abuse and the weight of the car, and then also on the other end it bolts straight to the existing BMW prop shaft, and it's got a sliding joint. The sliding joint is there for when the axle moves up and down. Obviously the length of the prop shaft changes ever so slightly, so you need a sliding joint in there. On the standard BMW one, it had a CV end, and the CV, like an axle CV does, floats, so it doesn't need a sliding joint, but on this we do. On the original Lincoln one, it has a slip yoke on the back of the gearbox where the prop shaft slips in and out of the gearbox, so we've kind of got a mix of both. And the prop shaft UJs and the slider are all fully greasable, all sealed. It's nice and compact. It's not as big a bore as the original Lincoln one, so it looks great. Now on to the next job, which is just a little bit of suspension work. We're going to swap out the shocks all round. These are the front ones, and we've just swapped them out because they were completely knackered and it was just not worth keeping them. Inside the engine bay then, we just started to tidy up some of the wiring. Obviously we've got the ECU mounted, as you know, and then just tidying up some of this wiring while we can, just to make it a bit easier to work on. We've got the water bottle mounted there on the right hand side for the expansion tank for the radiator, which is all mounted in, as you know. Pipework's come along quite well and everything's looking a bit neater. We've got to do something for the clean air, cold air inlet, and there's the exhaust all in. You can see better from the top, and you can see how much room there is behind the engine, so start a motor and all that sort of stuff will be easy to work on. So that's the standard BMW throttle pedal mounted in the car, and then we've got the shifter here as well, all hooked up. We've got drive with our mock prop shaft. Once we get that swapped out, then we can go and take it for a run. Popping brakes work.
So quick spin in the yard then, now it's time to take it out on the open road.
Super smooth. Like even just cruising like this is pretty smooth. The ride could be a little bit less wallowy, but mad. Listen to that. Turbo noises. So in terms of getting it working now, we're pretty much done. She's in the car, everything works, it's all wired up, it's all plumbed up and everything like that, which is really cool. And it drives, as you know. And yeah, it's all gone in relatively straightforward. Obviously with a car like this and a conversion like this, it's only 2-wheel drive. That takes a lot of the stuff, a lot of the extra stuff out of it compared to if you did a Land Rover or another 4-wheel drive car where you've got the whole transfer box and extra prop shaft and everything to deal with. But conversion wise, it's been quite straightforward, and happy with how it's come out actually now, and it does drive really well. It's a lot of torque for this car, and definitely too big of a car for these little Welsh lanes, but yeah, it's a really cool thing. So there you go, from a big, huge, inefficient V8 engine that didn't produce that much power given its size, to a German refined diesel engine that will still get probably 30 miles to the gallon, but it's got 400 horsepower, 6-speed gearbox, super refined in comparison. Yeah, so it's a bit of a change really. There you go guys, again it's changed massively, so from this big V8 engine now to a nice European German refined diesel engine with 6 speeds. Really nice to drive, really different to drive than it was before. It was sort of really sluggish and loud, and now it's a bit spicy, and yeah, it's just got cool turbo noises, which is always nice. So thanks for watching. Check out our next video, like and share and subscribe and all that good stuff.